Flojaune Cofer serves on the Measure U Community Advisory Committee, working to ensure effective oversight of the new 1-cent Measure U tax dollars in Sacramento. She joins me to talk about how the 15-person committee will work with residents to hear spending proposals and make spending recommendations. Next on Studio Sacramento.
At Five Star Bank, we create thoughtful solutions to help the Capital Region thrive, from economic development and education to public health and safety, issues that are vitally important to Sacramento's prosperity. We're proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
Flo, most bond issues get passed and you never hear about them again. Why do we have a committee for Measure U?
We have a committee for Measure U because people really cared about where this money was going. It was the right time for the city to start paying more attention to its budget in a way that oftentimes, just like you said, we don't pay much attention. In light of what happened with the Stephon Clark shooting and people really paying attention to what was happening in terms of investments in the neighborhoods in Sacramento. And so that's really why Measure U has gotten as much attention as it has.
It's interesting you mentioned the Stephon Clark shooting, and as part of the whole set of issues related to neighborhoods, their development, and who's living there and what their opportunities are. From the standpoint of the committee, what do you believe that your charge is?
Our charge, as written in the documents that created us, is for us to provide advice to City Council. So we are an advisory committee to be able to weigh in on how the Measure U money is spent. And that is a very different charge than the previous Measure U committee had, which was basically just to make sure that the Measure U money was spent as they said it was going to be spent. We actually are charged with making recommendations and formally proposing things to the council to do with the Measure U money.
That is really interesting. How are you all going to make recommendations? Where are you going to get that information from?
We are going to solicit it from the community. And so that's one of the great things about the way that our committee is working, is that we have completely open meetings. And so we are going to be requesting that people send us recommendations for how to spend this money, come and testify before us and share their views on what some of the major issues are in the city. The purpose of having a committee that has 15 people on it that represent such a wide and diverse cross section of our city is so that we're getting those perspectives in and considering them even as we're vetting projects.
Some might say that we elect council members to do that. Mm-hmm. Why do we as a community need you all?
Well, the council members have a different charge. For one, they often have worked their ways through the ranks in terms of, the political process and being able to run for office. And so they have been, in many instances, they've been doing this work for a while. And so they have the perspective of having worked as city council members or as the mayor. And the community members are sort of living in these communities doing some of the work that we actually need to understand in order to be able to vet projects. So I think there's a real need for people who are actively engaging in some of the work that's happening to provide those perspectives. But also, we have a charge for this particular committee that's a little different than others. One of the seats is for someone under 24, and so we have that seat. We have each of the city council members obviously having the ability to appoint someone, and then we have people who have a background in public health or youth services or business and economic development who are on the committee to provide that particular expertise.
Yeah, give us a sense of who else is serving on this committee.
Sure. So our committee is 15 people, and we have a really wide and, as I said, diverse array of Sacramentans on the committee. We have everyone from Amanda Blackwood, who is over the Metro Chamber. We have Marjorie Dickinson.
First female CEO.
Yes, first female CEO of the Metro Chamber. We have Alice Perez, who's with AT&T and is representing part of the business community. We have Stevante Clark, the brother of Stephon Clark, representing District 8. We have Kim Williams, who's with the Black Child Legacy Campaign. We have Amani Lucas, who is with Health Education Council. We also have Debbie Odo-Kent, who is with the Health Education Council as well. We have Dana Cavell, who is with Sacramento State.
You can stop there. That is a extremely diverse committee, but diverse from the standpoint of backgrounds. But from observing the history of Sacramento and similar types of committees, in the past. This does not look like business as usual because, frankly, it would all be, old business community folks
And developers.
and developers and folks like
yeah.
that. This is very different.
Yes.
What does that say about the priorities that you all have collectively in terms of how you're going to go about your job?
Well, I think what it says is that we are now at a place as a city to really reconsider some of the things that were foregone conclusions for a long time.
Like what?
Like the idea of how we spend our budget every year, right? I mean, most cities, and Sacramento is not exceptional in this, spend most of their money on public safety, defined as police and fire. That's always been the way we've spent our money, and we haven't really thought much about it.
What's wrong with that? Some would say that the neighborhoods, and particularly the underserved communities, have a greater need for police and fire than anyone else.
They have a greater need for public safety investments, certainly. But defining that simply as police and fire does the same thing that we used to do to medicine, right? Our medical system was largely defined as being able to get care when you need it, right? Emergency management is the pinnacle of the U.S. healthcare system, not prevention. But we started recognizing that you can't manage your way out of a lot of the issues that we're facing in health. That what we needed to do was take a step upstream and work on these issues before they became so damaging that you needed quadruple bypass surgery or other things like that. Because it's just not a solvent system when you're constantly paying to repair things instead of thinking about how we can make sure they're not broken in the first place. So it's sort of like, owning a home, right? Do you defer maintenance until you have to fix everything, or do you on an ongoing basis make little investments so that nothing ever breaks?
So are our neighborhoods and the residents that lives there, for some of them, are they the victims of deferred maintenance?
In many ways, yes.
Tell us how that manifests itself.
That manifests itself in us seeing public safety as only being police and fire and not thinking about it as being, where are people going to go to access food? Where are people going to work? How are they going to get there? I mean, if you think about even some of the recent changes in SAC RT in terms of how we provide service, a lot of that was to decrease time so that people don't have to wait an hour for the next bus, because that has a big impact on whether or not you can get to work every day and you can access the other services throughout the rest of the city. When we think about, the investments we've made in the literal infrastructure in terms of where have we built parks, where have we decided to invest in community centers, what have we done to make sure that each community has something? How often do we clean the streets? How often do we make sure that the community is well lit? What are the other investments we're making that go beyond just having somebody available when someone calls 911? Because I see every 911 call as an opportunity to look and see what could have prevented that call in the first place. And there are a lot of opportunities where we could have prevented. There are going to be some where we're always going to need some amount of emergency services. But I don't think a city is healthy if half of its budget is spent on reactionary services related to public health and not on those major preventive investments that make it so that we live healthy lives in the first place.
But from a financial standpoint, there are tremendous city employment and in particular police and fire obligations, not just salaries, but pensions,
Yes.
health care and the like.
Yes.
Those are obligations that a bargain was made. Your issues as you describe them sound compelling, but should they crowd out pre-existing obligations to people who have made a bargain with the city
Not at all.
that need to be honored?
Not at all. We have to honor our pension obligations. We would be unethical if we didn't. When you make a promise to someone, you should honor that promise. So we are going to have to find a way to make sure that we pay those. But what we don't have to do is continue to make the same mistake moving forward in terms of the bulk of our budget being spent on these services in this way without really looking to see, is this what we need? And the example that I can think of most is that a lot of the calls that police, for example, field are calls related to nuisance and related to mental health. And so they are not equipped to be able to provide a long-term solution for those. So we call, we do a quick little, something to be able to appease the person who called for a little while, but that problem is still there. The underlying issue is not resolved. And so if we don't make some investment in resolving the underlying issue, we just have this revolving sort of, back and forth of, we call the police, they come out, they do nothing long-term. We call the police, they come out and do nothing long-term. And we're going to continue to sink money into that.
Well, let's talk about the money. Give us the basic structure of Measure U, where it came from, and how the recent passage is different than what was already in place?
Sure. So now a decade ago, voters in Sacramento voted to approve Measure U as a half-cent sales and use tax. And that was scheduled to expire in the spring at the end of March of 2019. And so in 2018, the mayor and council decided to propose renewing that Measure U half-cent tax, but making it a 1 cent permanent sales tax. And so now that tax will not expire. It is in effect in perpetuity until the voters come along and decide to repeal it. And so that is the major difference, is that the one was set to sunset, this one does not, and now it's 1 cent. And the thing I think a lot of people don't recognize about it is it's not just a sales tax, it's also a use tax, which means that, for example, there are far fewer car dealerships within the city of Sacramento. But the use tax requires that if you buy your car in Roseville or in Folsom or in one of the surrounding areas that's not part of the city, you still pay that Measure U use tax to the city.
And how much money is this going to generate?
About $100 million a year. The half-cent Measure U tax brought in about $50 or so million a year, so we are slated to bring it 100.
Now, you know the cynics believe that the minute that this money starts to pour in, that the power structure, whether it's labor unions, including police and fire, real estate developers, big business, whatever, is going to snatch all of that away and use it for their own purposes. Do you all have any power to make a difference?
Well, I'm going to take one step back and say I think it's funny that you are not including me in the cynics, because I think I'm in this role in particular as the chair because I am potentially one of the cynics, and I'm trying to turn my cynicism into productivity. Because it's one thing to stand on the sidelines and say, I bet you they're going to do it this way, and it's another thing to actually roll up your sleeves and say, okay, what am I going to do to help? And so that's really one of the reasons why I got involved with this. To answer the question of whether or not we have power, that's an interesting one, and one that I pose to myself all the time. I think we do have a level of power, and I think that power depends on how willing the council is to engage with us. And right now it seems like they are. It seems like they are, in the conversations that they've been having around the budget, they have been saying, we really want to leave a lot of these decisions to the new Measure U committee and to the city manager's investment committee to vet projects and come back to us with some fully fleshed out ideas for how this could happen. And so I think to the extent that that continues, the committee has a lot of power. The question, though, becomes if we make proposals that the council disagrees with, what is our recourse? And really, we are an advisory committee, so we exist to share things with them, to use, Game of Thrones references. We are Tyrion, but Tyrion does not sit on the Iron Throne, and so he is not the one who ultimately gets to make those decisions. And so you can advise to the best of your ability, but then ultimately have to defer to the body that was elected to make the decisions.
But Littlefinger said that power resides where it believes it resides.
That is absolutely true. And so that is part of the reason why we are taking the approach that we are in terms of thinking about what our priorities are going to be, how we are going to work, and how we should interface with the council.
So how is it that you and your fellow commissioners or committee members, as it were, as you go out into the community, how are you going to not only collect but prioritize how your recommendations are formed? Because there are a million needs and there will never be as much money as there are needs. Have you come up with a process yet for doing that?
We are right in the midst of coming up with a process to begin to think about our priorities. The first is to learn about what people on the committee are actually already interested in. What is the background that we're bringing, especially for the 9 people who were appointed, including myself, by a city council member or the mayor. We don't come because we had a specific, background or expertise. Unlike, I didn't mention Kathy Cresswell, who's coming from the Housing Alliance. Like, you have folks who are on the committee who are coming with a particular set of skills and a background and expertise. But then there are 9, the majority of the committee, that don't have that reason for having been appointed. And so a lot of the first work we have to do is sort of identifying what we're all already interested in. And then we want to go back to the community and say, okay, we have this charge. What are some of the things that we can do? And I have been encouraging everybody that I've sat down with for the last few months, since I was appointed to the committee and now as the chair, to come before us and share, whether you're representing climate change, whether you're talking about food banks, whether you're talking about housing. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your proposals.
Well, some might say that Sacramento has rebounded from the depths of the recession, that there's a lot of employment. It seems like the region is functioning again, inclusive of the city of Sacramento. Things are pretty good. What's the problem you're trying to solve?
Well, I would say that things are pretty good depending on who you're asking. There are still pockets of our community, when we think about Northgate, when we think about Meadowview, when we think about South Oak Park, that have not had that same level of investment and are experiencing rising costs in housing. We have a housing crisis, that's not an overstatement to call it that, here in Sacramento, and that people are being priced out of being able to live affordably. And that has real consequences, especially because from all the economists that I've talked to, and I'm certainly not one of them, we are overdue, or if not soon due, for another recession, because economies don't just continue to expand for decades on end, that we eventually experience that. We also are unlike cities of comparable size throughout the state, like Oakland, which people often forget we're the same size as Oakland, but we are the state capital.
I didn't know that.
Yes, we are the state capital, and so we don't have industry in the way that some of our other cities do, and so so a lot of our employment is tied to government, and government wages don't go up, certainly not at the same price that our housing prices are going up. So the cost of living here really is rising, and that's going to create even more challenges than it already has. So yes, there are ways that, to go back to, we had a pre-conversation about us, that people who are doing well can sort of ignore what's happening over here, but there are people in our community who are really struggling right now, and that only stands to get worse when the pension obligations come up and we have to start spending more and we have fewer resources, and or if the economy experiences a recession, because right now we have a little more money in the coffers because we haven't had to pay the pensions, and because people are selling their homes. And so when those homes that they bought for lower prices are now being sold at higher prices, based on Prop 13, we're now getting in more revenue in property taxes. And so that will stop during a recession when people hold on to their homes. So there are some things that we're sort of trying not to just operate in the here and now, but also really think about what's coming in the future and what we need to have in place so that we are in the best position to weather that storm and to come out with more than we started with, hopefully.
Your background is in epidemiology.
Yes.
And so when you look at Sacramento as a person who's been trained in studying systems, where is it that you believe that Sacramento has excelled in terms of providing for its population, and where do you think that we just have really missed it over the years, and that we have totally underinvested in that aspect of community?
So I am not a native Sacramentan, despite the fact that I probably am a bigger champion than some of the people who were born here and went to high school here and have been here for a long time. I'm a huge champion of Sacramento. And so the thing that I see Sacramento having done in even the short decade that I've been here has been really sort of trying to redefine what it has to offer. There was a time when Sacramento was viewed as a sleepy town where everything, went to bed at 4:30 p.m. on Friday and nobody woke up again until 9 a.m. on Monday. And that has changed. We're now beginning to see Sacramento as a place where the farm to fork movement has really taken off, where there are things to do. It's not quite a destination city yet, but I can see that happening. And so I think we've done a good job at trying to rebrand, and for the people who are coming here, not seeing this as just the sleepy cow town. I think where we have had some challenges is that a lot of that rebranding has happened in the Midtown area and in certain places.
Really?
Yes. And so we haven't seen that same thing filter out into our neighborhoods. One of the things I noticed when I first moved here was, and I'm an East Coaster by birth and raising, is that the light rail system didn't start at any place that was like a destination you were trying to get to. It didn't end. At the time, it didn't go to Sleep Train Arena. It didn't go to the airport. It didn't go to Arden Fair Mall. I couldn't get to the Cal Expo. You couldn't get to places you were trying to
You
get.
know, it's funny. I've been here for over 40 years, and I've never thought about it that way. But you're right.
There were all these signs around, take RT to the fair. And so I'm like, okay, well, there's no train, so I'll take the bus. And then the bus stopped at 8 o'clock, but the concert doesn't start until 8 o'clock. So I ended up taking this is before Uber, I'd take a taxi home because I took RT to the fair and couldn't stay for the entire event. And so that was one of the things that I've noticed is just, even if you were just trying to do basic things within the city, there was this way in which it wasn't intended for people to move beyond neighborhoods. And so I think that is in some ways been either symptomatic of or maybe a part root cause of some of the lack of development outside of the city center.
And if things go as you and your committee anticipate, and that the mayor and council have kind of built this process, what can we expect to see over the next 3, 5, 10 years?
Our hope is that some of the issues that we have seen as top priorities will begin to have been addressed in some way. I don't want to say that we're going to, set out to solve housing issues or solve climate change or solve, some of these things, but I certainly think that we should be in a better position than we were beforehand, and that we are not having the exact same conversation, but we're having a different conversation based on the inevitable mistakes that we will make, and we will make them all. If you're not making mistakes, you're not taking enough risks, and you're not trying anything new. So we will make mistakes along the way, but the goal is that we learn from those mistakes and that we will have a new set of challenges that are facing us, not the same issues that have been, plaguing us for a while.
This is really interesting. You talk about we will make mistakes.
Absolutely.
There is part of the culture of Sacramento, my opinion, is that we have zero tolerance for mistakes, and that the people, the watchers on the wall, so to speak, are always observing, looking for the slightest mistake. And it sounds like you're talking about a little bit of an experimentation.
Absolutely.
As well. How is it that you're going to teach the town to accept that with experimentation, there's a range of outcomes that can happen, not all of them successful, and be okay with it?
Well, I'm going to go back to the Clifton Strength Finders and say my number one strength is activator. So I like to try things, and one of the things that I learned in going through that process was also that, our mantra is kind of fail fast. So we don't want to make major investments in something and then realize 10 years down the line that wasn't working. We want to invest, and we want to make sure that we have ways to be able to evaluate the success and that we can pivot before we have sunk so much into this thing that's not working that now we find ourselves backpedaling and trying to justify why it was successful. We really want to look at tried and true models that have existed elsewhere that could exist here, and also what we've learned from those that can give us some way that we could operate a little differently. And so I think there's a lot of innovation to happen in terms of ideas that exist that have a good evidence base that we could try out and collect our own data to see if they're working, and then decide, oh, that wasn't the best investment, so next year. I mean, the great thing about having a permanent tax is that it's not as if there's only a certain amount of time before the fund runs out. So we want to be good stewards of those resources, certainly, but we also want to make sure that we're not just filling in gaps in the budget, that we're actually looking at the places where there's need and thinking about what could we do differently in order to be able to address some of those needs.
It's interesting in you saying that this money will continue on because there's not a sunset on it. What do you think was the catalyst that really drove, and I'm not talking about individual necessarily elected officials or anything like that, but was the catalyst that essentially galvanized the community, one, to support this effort, because Measure U didn't have any specific priorities attached to it,
Right.
but secondly, the political will to put into place a process that, from your description, is really going to seek ideas far and wide and be open to trying things that maybe haven't been tried before.
So I think two things are in play here. I think, first of all, people who really are invested in their city, and I think Sacramentans care about Sacramento in a way that is to be admired. I don't like to speak in superlatives and say we are the most caring about our future city, but I will say that I think it's certainly something to be admired, and it's part of the culture and spirit of our city. And so I think at its core, a lot of times, we go back to a basic instinct, which is that very rarely do we do better with less money. So when we were facing the potential of losing Measure U and all the signs around town that are telling us the pools are open because of Measure U and this was built by Measure U and these things have happened, we said to ourselves, if we like what has been done here, we likely aren't going to see more of that if we have fewer resources. So very rarely does your budget, dwindle and you get to do more and things get better in terms of the things you care about. So I think that was one of the reasons that people were interested. I think the other one is that when you do have a set time limit on funding, then you only get to invest in short-term things. And what we often like to call Band-Aids, when sometimes we need a suture and we really need to do something a little deeper or a little far-reaching. And so to pass something that's permanent puts us in a better position in terms of the city to be able to weather certain storms and to know that we're not going to face, or at least in the immediate future for sure, the prospect of not having this fund that we've now come to rely on or has now supported something that we really care about and would like to see more of or would like to invest more in.
And if people want to learn more
Yes.
and get involved, where should they go?
First of all, they should go to the city website because all of our meetings are available on Granicus, which is the city's ability to be able to televise and publicize all of the public meetings. So if you are not able to come to City Hall, you can always watch online there and also submit comments in that way. But also feel free to come out to our meetings. They're going to be hosted once a month. And so the dates vary, so I don't want to give you specifics of, like it's the second Wednesday. They've been on Wednesdays, but they're not always necessarily going to take place at that time. So always look on the city calendar. Any materials associated with the meeting are posted 3 days before the meeting. So you have an opportunity to look them over. You can make comments online that will be shared with all of the committee members. And come out and provide public comment. We love to hear from people, whether or not you have a formally fleshed out proposal or just something we should be thinking about. Some of the best ideas that I've had have happened from conversations that I've had on the bus.
Really?
Or somebody I bumped into in a really casual way who didn't submit a 10-page proposal have just said, have you thought about this?
And so we should all get involved.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, good luck, and we look forward to hearing about your progress.
Thank you.
And that's our show. Thanks to our guest and thanks to you for watching Studio Sacramento. I'm Scott Syphax. See you next time right here on KVIE.
At Five Star Bank, we create thoughtful solutions to help the Capital Region thrive, from economic development and education to public health and safety, issues that are vitally important to Sacramento's prosperity. We're proud to be part of the conversation and hope you'll join in.
All episodes of Studio Sacramento, along with other KVIE programs, are available to watch online at kvie.org/video.